joining us this afternoon. We have lunch that has already been served, so if you have not had a chance to make your plate, please make your plate and find your way to your seats. The restrooms are located outside, up the stairs to your left, and we have a handicap bathroom straight ahead in the back towards the elevator. So I am so excited to have each and every one of you here this evening. We have a very impactful afternoon ahead. I just wanted to give a special shout out to Imani's Original Bean Pies. A very special treat for us this afternoon. And it's here for you to enjoy, and if you want to take it home as a gift or for later, we're selling them for $10 in the back. So they're very delicious, and I'm excited that they've made their way here tonight, this afternoon. So our moderator for this afternoon is Brother Gregory Abdullah Mitchell. Just a very impressive individual. I had a chance to speak to him for a few minutes. Very insightful, an attorney, and he's used his area of expertise to constantly give back to the Muslim community as an advocate for minorities and youth. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, I'd like to have Brother Mitchell come up and take over as the moderator so we can get our program started. Thank you all. I'm so sorry, Brother Mitchell just reminded me that I was in such a rush to get the program started. I'd like to call Brother Abdul Moiz up to start with the recitation of the Quran. Brother Moiz, please make your way up here.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. قالت الأعراب آمنا قل لم تؤمنوا ولكن قولوا أسلمنا ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبكم وإن تطيعوا الله ورسوله لا يلدكم من أعمالكم شيئا إن الله غفور رحيم. إنما المؤمنون الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله ثم لم يرتابوا وجاهدوا بأموالهم وأنفسهم في سبيل الله أولئك هم الصادقون. صدق الله العظيم. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most beneficial. O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes, that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you. Indeed, Allah is knowing and acquainted. The Bedouins say, we have believed. Say, you have not yet believed, but say instead, we have submitted, for faith has not yet entered your hearts. And if you obey Allah and His Messenger, He will not deprive you from your deeds of anything. Indeed, Allah is forgiving and merciful. The believers are not ones. The believers are only the ones who have believed in Allah and His Messenger, and then doubt not, but strive with their properties and their lives in the cause of Allah. It is those who are the truthful.
MashaAllah. Oh, what a beautiful voice. Thank you so much, Moise. Now I'd like to call Brother Mitchell back up and get our panelists.
Good afternoon. Peace be with you all. That pregnant pause was intentional. I know I'm competing right now with a tasty meal in front of you, so I have to use whatever trick I can to get your attention. This afternoon we are here together for a program from the Interfaith and Outreach Committee of MEC. And the subject matter is the intersectionality of race, gender, and class. And the panelists that the committee has assembled are three noteworthy persons in the African American community who, inshallah, will be able to bring good insights to us this afternoon in our discussion. The committee also submitted a number of questions that they wanted the panel to address. When the panel members and I had a chance to kind of go over those questions, there were certain themes that we saw in those questions. And there were the two things that kind of resonate to the members of the committee, of the panel. One of those things was a definition, where the questions really embedded in the questions is, who are you as African Americans? Who are you as Muslims? And when you have questions couched or framed as, what's the difference between black Muslims and mainstream Muslims, and what's going to help black Muslims become mainstream Muslims, we need first to take a moment and give a definition of what it means to be Muslim, and particularly as being African American. The second thing is, a number of the questions really focused in on, let's say, some anecdotal experiences people may have had, but it really relates to one central point. What is the relationship between you and another person who is Muslim and is of African American descent? And underneath that particular question of relationship is this question of, what value do you place on this particular relationship? Because depending on what value you assign to the relationship will by and large lend definition to how you interact, how you relate to each other, and what one sees and expects of the other. So with that as a background, how they saw the questions, the next thing that I was asked to do as a preamble to this panel is to lay out from their aspect certain, let's call them ground rules, or let's say points of understanding between you as an audience and them as a panel. The first point that they wanted to share with you is that the premise of this is that we're here to share information and learn about one another. The intent is to assume the best of intentions of everyone. What the panel members will be doing is sharing their personal experiences in answering some of your questions. how these relationships, or this intersection as the term has been used, impacts them in their life. Maybe not only as being African American, maybe as being female, or to the extent we're talking about social status. The other aspect of it is that the intent is to give you true, frank answers to your questions. How, once again, grounded in their personal experiences. And that is said to say, it's not an attempt to give an answer that is politically correct. It is to share how people actually perceive and feel about things. So it's not a point that we're trying to, anyone wants to walk away to say, oh, this person offended me by what they said. The objective is to identify mutual and root out any biases or prejudices that we collectively can begin to challenge and then move forward, eliminate. The other aspect of it is, one of the ground rules that the panel has in discussion is they would hope that this afternoon will not be merely an afternoon of, let's say, a one-time experience of, let's say, true confession, and people have empathy for a moment, and then we go home, and then nothing happens until maybe next year this panel is held again. We would hope that what come from this is that we will understand mutuality of obligations one has with the other, and to begin to flesh out, say, certain asks or positive things that we can do to challenge some of the misperceptions that may come rooted out, biases that may come rooted out, and in essence, and move forward to build the Muslim community that is contemplated by our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So with that as an introduction, now I would like to take this time to introduce to you our panelists. And though I'm quite familiar with 2 out of the 3 and learned to know the third pretty well, I'm still going to read what was said because I might ad-lib poorly. Let me first start with our first panelist is Dr. Aisha El-Amin. Dr. Aisha El-Amin holds a PhD in Policy Science Studies of Urban Education from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Dr. El-Amin is passionate about issues of equality and justice in education. These passions have led her to become a certified teacher, an adjunct professor, an elected school board member for School District 168, and board member for the Rutledge Journal, Religion and Education. As a higher education administrator, Dr. El-Amin has served as a grant manager, an executive director, an associate dean, and currently is the associate provost and chief of staff for the University of Illinois at Chicago. Dr. El-Amin's activism is best captured in her work with Just Greetings, a family-owned greeting card line dedicated to celebrating the commitment to justice, and in her volunteer work with various Chicago-based organizations, including Teachers for Social Justice, Bridging the Gap, Inner City Muslim Action Network, Iman, Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago, and the Council for American Islamic Relations, CARE Chicago. And Masjid Al-Amin, as a board member. Dr. El-Amin resides in Homewood, Illinois with her husband of 18 years, Imam Tariq El-Amin, and their 3 teenage daughters, Sakia, Sahira, and Yalina El-Amin. So with that introduction, Dr. El-Amin, will you come forward and take the stand, please? Our next panelist is the resident imam of Masjid Taqwa. Imam Tariq El-Amin is a leader in the Chicago's Muslim community and serves and plays an active part in its inter and intra-faith community. He is the host of Radio Islam, airing on WCEV 1450 AM from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. each day. And he's been the resident imam of Masjid al-Taqwa since 2013. He's the founder and executive director of Bridging the Gap, which provides community board banding opportunities through service projects and recreational activities. He has also served on the Illinois Muslim Action Council, established by former Governor Pat Quinn, and serves on a variety of nonprofit boards that reflect his personal commitment to service and leadership in social justice. Imam Tariq Al-Amin, would you please join us on the panel at this stage? And then our third panelist is Bashir Ahmad. But Sister Bashir Ahmad is the social media coordinator of Sapella Square, an online resource for on Black Muslims in the United States. She develops and manages the Sapella Square brand across various social media platforms while satisfying her passion to educate communities on the intersection of being Black and Muslim in America. Bashir received a Bachelor of Science in Political Science, Black World Studies, and Islamic World Studies from Loyola University, Chicago. In her leisure, Bashir enjoys traveling to places that have significant African and African diaspora histories and cultures. In recent years, she has traced the forced migration routes of her ancestors by exploring the southeastern coastal United States, West Africa, the Caribbean, Europe, and South America. Sister Bashir Ahmad, will you please join us on the panel? Let me, if we could, begin this discussion by starting with each panelist, before we go to the questions, to share with their personal insights, and like I said, I gave a summary of how they see this afternoon and what objectives they are. But it's important to hear from each of the panelists personally, so let me start to my immediate right, Sister Bashir Ahmad. Would you kind of just give your summary of how you see this afternoon and what you would hope would come from our panel discussion today?
All right, assalamu alaikum and peace be with you all. Again, I'm the social media coordinator for Sapelo Square. We're an award-winning digital humanities blog that focuses on the contributions of Black Muslims in the U.S. Through arts and culture, history, politics, and religion. And as a social media coordinator, I spend a lot of time online engaging with audiences. So I'm on Facebook, managing the page, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. I spend a lot of my time daily interacting online with audience members. But we also understand that it's really important to kind of get offline and be with people in the community. So offline engagement is just as important to me. So I'm really excited to be here to sort of share what is for me a culmination of my personal experience, my educational experience, and just the histories of my ancestors.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. So for me, I wear a variety of different hats, and it's always interesting to see how things play out depending on what role you're in. And I think the basis of this conversation is one that's going to be effective if we can have it with an understanding, first and foremost, that we use Quranic support as far as our understanding, that we put the best construction on the perspectives that are given. There are a lot of different people in the room, and we are a sum of our experiences. You know, we can't speak about things that we really haven't lived or we don't know intimately. That being said, I'm hoping for an honest discussion that pushes us towards a clear understanding of one another, ourselves. We will be, inshallah, speaking very honestly, and hopefully that allows us to see maybe some of the biases we may hold, maybe some of the assumptions that we have held without realizing that, you know, that they may be baseless. But more than anything, I'm hoping that this is going to be a conversation that is going to push us to more productive and cohesive action. So, assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. So, I first of all want to give a big shout out to MCC for having macaroni and cheese and meat pie, right? Like seriously, we don't go into spaces and see food that is common, right? And so there was some thought, and we realized that when you think of folks, that there's a care that goes into that, and there's a sense of inclusivity that we feel. And so, seriously, a big shout out. And so those are the kinds of things that I hope to get out of this interaction with each other and engagement with each other. Yes, we are up here to speak about our experiences, but we also want to hear about yours. And our experiences do not devalue or eliminate yours. We can have different experiences and share those in a very authentic way that helps us collectively get to a better space, a better ummah. And so, inshallah, my intention is to be as real as I am, because I can only be me. And I ask that you only be you, and that collectively we can get to a better space. And so, again, thank you, and let's get started.
With that, let me, as I outlined to you in the beginning of this, is going through the series of questions that were given, and I'm not sure, in the interest of time, we're trying to find common themes. So the first question that the panel, I'm going to ask the panel to address, is this question about definition of themselves as Muslims. And let me just read the background questions to each of you, and then I'll start with Dr. Al-Amin in the reverse order this time for your particular responses. But the first question was, what are your qualities that make you a minority in the Muslim community? The second one that does this, relates to a definition, is do you think there's a division between black Muslims and other Muslims? And then finally, the definition question was, Malcolm X, once a powerful member of the Nation of Islam, started to move towards mainstream Islam. So how is the Nation of Islam different from mainstream Islam? And in your responses, at this point, I would not ask you to answer those questions directly, but really each question poses a dichotomy between black Muslims and mainstream Muslims. So if we can address that as from your particular perspective of defining who you are.
Right, absolutely. So I'm glad that you hit on that point in particular. First of all, there's courage in even asking a question, right? And so I want to both value that and put that out there. That I value those that speak from their heart and ask the questions that are sincere, and I receive it as such. But I also want to challenge you in this kind of this dichotomous space of black Muslims and everyone else, right? You're bucketing us. You're putting all of us into one bucket and everybody else into another bucket. And so just the asking of that question in that way and thinking about the way that we talk and the vocabulary that we use that ostracizes a group of people, that others them, right? And so if we can get into kind of the way that we engage each other and the way that we speak to one another, tell something about the way we think of each other, right? And so what I ask is that you switch it up. Turn it around a little bit. Yes, I'm black and I'm Muslim. I'm very proud of those identities. I'm also a woman. I'm also a scholar. I'm also a mother. I'm also, and so I'm multiple things. And my blackness can be categorized in many different ways. When we talk about intersectionality, which we're here to talk about, how I live out my blackness is relative to my gender. It's relative to my social class. It's relative to many other things. And so when you essentialize, and you take one group of people and you call them just one thing, you negate the beauty and the complexities of all that we are, right? And nobody wants to feel that way. And so there's a lot to many of those questions. And in a sense, what I would look at this as, and can you all hear me if I do this? Probably not, right? Some of this is what I would ideally like us to do is to like rap with each other, and you all are kind of onlookers in this really honest conversation. Because I'm not thinking of myself as talking at you, I'm talking to you. And so because we're not dialoguing yet, and I'm dialoguing with them, I kind of want to not just take on all those questions, but to kind of have a back and forth with the panel around how those questions settled with us and how we feel about those questions.
I so hate going after you.
No, in all seriousness, to move that idea forward, these words, minority, they require an acceptance of a particular context. So when we say minority, if we're talking about it, if we're thinking in a local, within a local framework, then I would have to say, well, I have to reject that ideology or that terming as being a minority, and just locally, right? But then if you go globally, you still find yourself rejecting that same idea of being a minority. As a person of African descent, as an African American, a black Muslim, or whatever term I choose to wear, and I refer to myself in different terms. But however I refer to myself, I have to look, if I'm looking globally, I have to say, number one, that Africans, people of color, are not the minority globally, first off. Second of all, if we're looking nationally, Pew Research statistics put African American Muslims at upwards of 30% of the Muslim population. So we're looking once again with a diverse community, not a minority, once again. If I'm looking at, going back locally, if I look at my presence, my identity just as an African American, not even as a Muslim, just as an African American within the city of Chicago, once again, I can't look at myself and call myself a minority. Acceptance of these types of terms, what they do is that they kind of put us on the defense. They put us in positions where we feel like we have to speak louder, that our opinions, our viewpoints are less valuable, they have less weight, and just in the word minority. So, though I appreciate the question, I have to also push back on that and say, I don't see myself as a minority. And then I'd like to also extend the idea, looking at the history of Africans that have been brought here, that were enslaved. And I recommend one of the books, we just did a book review last night. We didn't get through the whole book on Radio Islam, and that was on enslaved Africans, Servants of Allah, by Sylvan, so his name, Diouf, yes, which is an excellent book. And what it does is it allows us to see that the African Muslims that were brought here, that they were the standard bearers of Islam here in the Americas. And by that, what do I mean? I mean, if you look at what they represented a highly educated, multilingual, extremely devout, and adaptable people who found ways to express their belief, who found ways to practice, and whose practices have been passed down generation to generation to generation, and even find themselves today present within the African American church. There are many experiences and representations of that commitment, of that representation, that we see that we don't really understand what we're looking at. So I see myself not as a minority, I see myself as a standard bearer. I see myself as an extension, as a representation of a people who came here with Islam and who have fought to maintain a connection, fought to maintain an identity and a voice. So that being said, I don't look at myself. I've never looked at myself as a minority. And I'm gonna close with this. You mentioned Malcolm X. May Allah have mercy on him. Grant him paradise for the influence and work that he did. Though we're not a monolith, one of the things that he pushed was this idea of a global awareness, not just Africans, but people of color in particular, because he realized that we're not minorities, and to refer to ourselves as such is to do ourselves a disservice.
I think, thank you both of you for that. I think to kind of bring it all home, I definitely agree. I wouldn't call myself or see myself or view myself as a minority, and I think language in itself is really important because words have weight. And so when we say, or if there's an assumption that this person must view themselves in this light, that is an assumption being made without actually having a conversation, instead of assuming that that is the case. To be a minority, in my mind, when I think about that word, it is to be minor, and I reject and claim that anything about me is minor. You know, as Allah has created me in you know, the way that He intended, I don't think for myself that any aspect of my being is a small thing. I belong to a vast community. We see ourselves, I think, as part of a global ummah, right? And so, you know, that is also something that I consider when I think about myself. I don't see myself as being separate. I actually didn't grow up thinking, I identified as being African American Muslim. I came from an African American Muslim community, but we were very well aware of brothers and sisters in Bosnia and what they were going through in the 80s and the 90s, very much aware of what was going on in Philistine in the 80s and the 90s, very much aware of Muslims that existed in Indonesia. Like, I'm a child of the 80s, and I come from a background of people who, my parents in their generation, they converted to Islam or reverted to Islam because in our ancestry, people were Muslim, right? And so for me, I don't see myself as separate from a global ummah, but we are all connected in that way.
Because I know how our schedule is a little bit different, and I know you wanted to have an opportunity for the audience to interact with the panel. And whether or not that first question, because of definition, that if anyone wanted to raise a question of what is meant by that, and how that perception may influence the interaction. And to that, let me add this to the discussion, and notwithstanding not being a panelist, but the whole concept of what mainstream means when we look at the constituency of the Islamic community, when we look at the constituent of the people within this room, they come from very cultural backgrounds, but all have, many here present, have accepted Islam as a way of life for them. So to say what is meant by the question mainstream versus black, that question still is out there, and it really needs the questioners to bring definition when they say, what is the difference that you perceive? Because in those differences lies some of the divisions that may exist between us at this particular point. And I know it's a kind of awkward to ask someone to put that out. I don't know if you want to circulate cards among the people when we submit a card, but before we, and I'm prepared, and we're prepared to move on to the relationship issues, but I think it's important that you as participants or audience members have an opportunity to share your view, because in the exploration of those concepts we can find and identify differences of understanding, and inshallah lead ourselves to a compatible basis of understanding. So let me kind of prick at that question a little bit, and I'm going to return to the question about the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam was very influential in drawing African Americans to Islam in the 20th century. How familiar are you with this movement? What are some of the misconceptions other Muslims have of the Nation of Islam? And this was the end part. Malcolm X, once a powerful member of the Nation of Islam, started to move towards mainstream Islam. So how is the Nation of Islam different from mainstream Islam? So, in answering that, panelists, I would like you to kind of give a cultural background when we address this particular question, the difference between mainstream Islam and the Nation Islam, prefacing it, your response with what familiarity, or what's your platform or experience that you go with. And this time we'll start with the Imam Tariq Al-Amin.
I just want to preface that I think this question is actually pretty interesting, and I am just going to be...
Bite at the pit.
Well, I would like to say that I think it's interesting that when someone would, if someone asked me what I would, can I speak about the Nation of Islam, I'm going to be very honest and say, I can't tell you a whole lot, because I think there's also an assumption that, sure, I studied and I understand that there's a connection in the history. I can probably give you a very broad, basic understanding of what the Nation of Islam, or who the Nation of Islam and what Muslims from that time period came. But I think it speaks to thinking that because you're black and Muslim, that you must know this. You must be an expert on this and that's not something it's not really fair to assume, because my parents didn't come out of the Nation of Islam, and there's so many ways in which African American Muslims have come into Islam, and it's not the same for everyone. So I think I would just say that before I pass the mic, but I think it's also interesting, and I think people should kind of think about not lumping all black Muslims together with the assumption that you should just know this, right?
Yes, and to once again to extend that line of thinking, as we are not a monolith, and nowhere, no particular group of folks are all the same. But I'll say this for me, that within the question, particularly when it comes to trying to differentiate and identify what are the differences, what makes the Nation of Islam different, what I also find is an undercurrent, and I'm not saying it's present in this question, but it's a question that I have been asked before, and I find that there is an assumption or a weighting that I am going to discredit the Nation of Islam to validate myself as a Muslim. And I'll go off on a quick tangent, this idea of mainstream. I think a nice way to understand this, internalize it, is this. When you look in the mirror, if you have a healthy self-esteem, you look at yourself and you think, I look pretty good, all right? Now, that's if you have a healthy self-esteem, a healthy self-image. And with that thinking, you also think your idea of beauty is based upon a similarity or closeness to you. So those who look similar to you, wow, that's a good-looking person. But the farther away somebody is from that image, they don't really qualify, you don't classify them as being beautiful. That's kind of the same thinking when it comes to this idea of mainstream. We look for people who maybe practice, who recite, who are the same madhab, all these similarities, who eat the same food, whatever it is. And we see this, we define our mainstream idea, our language, our thinking is defined according to that. But that's not reality. Now, the conversations that have been had don't necessarily reflect the lives that are lived. So to Sister Bashir's point, the Nation of Islam received quite a bit of publicity because of the stances that it took publicly, but it did not negate the reality of other expressions and communities of Islam within the African American experience. So my parents, actually, they were members of the Nation of Islam, right? So I would not be here. Well, I mean, Allah intended for me to be here, right? But you all understand, the logic is, this was their doorway into Islam. This was their doorway for me to be where I am today. So, what is that? How dare you? Oh, it's the moderator.
We're not going to bust you out.
Don't blame me.
Man, that's moderator 101, man. You got your phone on. All right. So, the differences are, I'll give you some homework for yourself. If you go to the final call and you look for point number 12 on the back of the paper, you will see some things. This is what Muslims believe. The final call is the newspaper of the Nation of Islam. It went from Muhammad Speaks originally. It has been the final call since 70, I think it was resurrected in 77. So maybe, I guess in 77, 78, 79. But since it was resurrected in 77, the paper has been referred to as the final call. So I would invite you to look there for yourself to see. But then also, I would also ask, as I wrap this up and pass the mic, is to ask how we define, right? To me, the definition of Muslim, of a community, has always been its impact on the community, on the safety and the prosperity, on the dignity, on the establishment of an actual community. The Nation of Islam has the most successful substance abuse treatment program in the history of the United States. That was operated under the leadership of Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Of course, he was not there to grab people, right? But through that community, so that impact on people who were outcast, that impact on people who had little hope, that had been given up on, and what it did for their lives, I can't think of a better representation of what it means to be Muslim, and to give something of value under this banner of Islam. So I think that history does us proud. I'm gonna stop there. Yeah, I talked
to bringing it kind of home and then resituating it in a broader context. I am the daughter of Elijah Muhammad's secretary. I was born in 75 when the transition from the Nation of Islam to the leadership, the passing of Elijah Muhammad to Warbi Muhammad's leadership. And so my engagement with the Nation of Islam is one that's very personal. I was raised to love my blackness. I was raised by a strong woman who understood that what she learned from the Nation of Islam was love of her blackness. In a context, again, bringing it outward, in a context where everything told her not to love who she was, where everything told her that she was less than, she found a community of people who said, no, that is not you. It helped her define herself. And what the Nation of Islam did for her in that particular time was a very beautiful thing that I applaud. What we see now in various kind of social organizations is a need to push back against this anti-blackness. And when I say anti-blackness, I mean black folks are okay as long as they're shaking their butts, giving you a rap lyric, or half dressed. Their culture is beautiful, but hating the black humans that occupy that space. When I say anti-blackness, I mean not being able to imagine blackness without the colonization, right? When I say anti-blackness, I mean the essentializing of the respectable black folks. And I have a black friend. When I say anti-blackness, I'm talking about having an epistemologically sound black person tell you something, but it only being acceptable if they have a PhD. I am talking about those kinds of things that we are situated in. Yes, I have a PhD, but let me be real with you all. I went to Murray Language Academy. I went to Chicago Vocational High School. After Chicago Vocational High School, I went to vocational high school because I did not have the capacity to learn. So I was supposed to get a vocation so that I can take care of myself. Afterwards, I went into the military. I was in the Army. I served as a military police officer for 5 years. While in the Army, situated in the Netherlands for 4 of those years, I learned that I actually did have the capacity, the cognitive ability to do more than I was doing. And that realization allowed me to keep going. I didn't get a PhD because I thought that was just the next step. I got a PhD because I was sitting in the classroom with babies, teaching 4th grade, and there were policies that impeded me from doing what I thought was right. And so I need to take class and see who's making these policies, because obviously they're not in the classroom. Right? So I went there in order to get answers that I needed in spaces to make a difference. Right? And now I realize that I'm invited into spaces because of that PhD. And so when I go into those spaces, I go back to my childhood, right? I go back to making sure that I use my voice in ways that push against anti-blackness. And I challenge myself, because I have 3 daughters. We have 3 daughters. I challenge them and I challenge myself on a daily basis to go into spaces and be the best of themselves when people talk to them as if from the back they are less than. And my research, and then I'll pass the mic, my research is on African American Muslims in the Chicago context, educating their children in a neoliberal space, right? And what I found is that so out of the 14 parents that I studied, each of them transferred their children at least 2 times. They transferred their children to Muslim schools that were immigrant run and found that their blackness was diminished. They transferred them to African-centered schools and found that their Islam was diminished, right? And so oftentimes we have these intersecting identities and we don't understand, and people don't understand how to engage in a way that makes sense. I'm not abandoning any part of me. If you're talking to me, you're talking to the woman in me, you're talking to the Muslim in me, you're talking to the black person in front of you, right? And so we have to understand how that interconnectivity cannot be dislodged, and nor should you ask anyone to. So when we talk about Nation of Islam, we talk about a history, right? And you can Google and find all of the horrible things, I'm sure, that don't relate to how you jive with Islam, and I get that. And I disagree with many of them. But what I choose to focus on instead are all the things like Sister Claire Muhammad, who said, my children are not going to get educated by you, right? Because what you're going to teach them is to hate themselves. So what I focus on are those things that made us better. And what I push you towards, is to look for those things that make us better and to emphasize those and carry those things on.
Thank you, Dr. Aisha. I think I just had one last thing to add to this question. And again, I can't speak as an expert on the Nation of Islam, but as someone who is a beneficiary of that movement, and all of us are, because what I wanted to say is that even the word mainstream in the context of America, that is relative to a particular time and space, because at the time of the Nation of Islam, that was the only Islam that Americans were familiar with. That was the only Islam that, in terms of Muslim communities, that were organized and active. So I think that's also something that I think we should kind of think about when we think of maybe present day and what's mainstream and just the history of Islam in America. Once upon a time, the majority of the only Muslims in America were black, if you consider the history of where we are and enslavement. So I think that's something I also wanted to add.
All right, once again, if there are some questions that are being put in writing, that you can bring them, because I'm following we're trying to follow the narrative that we've been presented with. But we would hope, I mean, I can tell you, speaking from the panel members earlier, what is intended or what would like to see is your participation. Because once again, this is not intended to be an afternoon of true confession by the 3 panelists, and you can say, ooh, I mean, the Dr. Alameen just gave a very passionate and empathetic story of her life background. And hopefully that gave you a different perspective of how we view the Nation of Islam. It's not merely, oh, they view Elijah Muhammad as a prophet, so therefore we're going to discount everything that they did. Therein is the mindset that is being challenged this afternoon, brothers and sisters. So now, with that in mind, I wanted to move forward to relationships, because we're talking about intersection of race, gender, and social class. And the questions start to, let me focus in on them. Like the very second question is, how are you treated by other Muslims? So the underlying premise of that question is that you're being treated differently. And the treated is such a broad umbrella that so much can come up with it. So let me just use that as our preface to start the questioning, because we could go into so many different directions that might not be as helpful. But let me take one, and hopefully you can use this as a springboard to expand on different treatment, if you're treated differently. And that question is, Chicago is a tale of two cities, from the Gold Coast to the Soul Coast. Fair housing and segregation was the way Chicago was developed. What progress, if any, do you see in housing in Chicago? And since this is a Muslim panel about Muslims, we're not going to talk about what's done in Bridgeport or other neighborhoods. Now we're going to talk about how has housing impacted, and really it draws to a much larger question of community building. How has that impacted you as a African American Muslim? Is that question clear? You got a puzzled look on your face. In terms of how do you see it different in treatment?
How do other Muslims treat?
Well, you got to
just so I can understand. How are we impacted by the treatment of other Muslims?
No, here's the question. I'm sorry, I'm being a good moderator right now. All right. Thank you, sister. I needed that backup. All right, anyway. What I'm really talking about is, the first question number 2 is there's a perception of being treated different.
Okay.
On both sides of the fence. So when we start talking about how we be treated differently, it presupposes that you may not be treated as good as you think, or as bad as it should be, however that may come out. But we need to provide some sort of context. One of the contexts I want to speak to now is this question about housing. Synonymous with housing is creation of communities. We have areas in the Chicagoland where there are communities of Muslims living. I mean, we live near MEC, we worship near MEC, we shop near MEC, and by and large, there are not many African Americans in this community. So now what I would like you to address in terms of your personal experiences, how do you see, as an African American Muslim, integrating and becoming a part of a Muslim community in the Chicagoland area?
I'd like to start with, I guess, a quick story. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, so I'm not a Chicagoan, but I've been here for probably over a decade, so maybe that makes me a Chicagoan. But I grew up in a community that was predominantly African American, where the masjid was the nucleus. So anything that was happening, whether it was a program, community event, movie night, like any entertainment, any Eid activities or celebrations, everything was organized through the masjid, and it was right in our neighborhood. We could walk there. I live probably about a 5-minute walk from the masjid, but you can hear the adhan in the morning, like from where I lived. And so that's the experience that I had growing up. And when I came to Chicago in 2005 as a transfer student, I was desperately looking for a community to just kind of anchor myself, right? I was away from home, I was away from my community, I was away from my family, I was away from everything that kept me, like, sane, right? So that was important to me. But coming here, I knew that there's Black people in Chicago, there's Muslims in Chicago, and some of those Muslims are Black people. So I thought, I'm an outgoing person. I really like, meet new people, so I'll have no problem finding community in Chicago. And alhamdulillah, I really haven't, there's been challenges, because what I find, and what I've only been able to sort of make sense of in the past few years is my community exists among people that I know, not necessarily a building or a structure like a masjid. I think for me, it was difficult to sort of sort of navigate Muslim communities in Chicago because one of the segregation. So when you talk about housing, I think of that in terms of the context of hyper-segregation in Chicago. Where do people who look like me live? I live on the north side, like I'm 15 minutes from here, and like my neighbor is a rabbi. So like I live in the very Jewish side of Devon. And so I had to be very intentional about being around other Black people. And for me, it was like, they on the south side. And I know going to Loyola and being a student there and being amongst the other Muslim students in the MSA, at the time, and I think it was there for many years, on the website, on the MSA website, they had just some language that said, as a Muslim student coming to Loyola, just be aware of not to travel too far south on the red line. And to me, I was like, oh my God, no they didn't. Because even though I'm not from Chicago, I know who lives on the south side of Chicago, they Black people. And they look like me. And those are the people I feel most comfortable with, right? In terms of my safety, security, my culture, the values. And so for me, it was like, I'm a Muslim student, I'm coming from out of state, and I can't even feel comfortable amongst other Muslims if they have this idea, which, they came from it's Chicago, it's this racial segregation, the hyper-segregation in Chicago is a real thing. And like you feel it on a personal level when you encounter other Muslims who have these attitudes that if you go to a predominantly Black neighborhood where Black folks live, you're gonna have a problem. And so for me as someone who's coming from out of state, just that was really problematic for me. And so to the question about like community and housing and segregation, those are things that I think about.
Thank you.
I went to Sister Claire Muhammad School. It closed in, I think, 85, 86 or something like that. But that was, this of course was during the time that Imam Wafdi Muhammad, the community, owned the space now that is Mosque Mariam. So what was University of Islam today, back then was Sister Claire Muhammad School. And to kind of echo Sister Bashir's point, is that was the hub, that was the space that the community galvanized around. And it still remains, that the southeast side of Chicago still remains highly populated by African American Muslims. As far as, so I should just say this, that set something, that put a seed in me, an expectation of what a functioning community looks like. To have that central space that can not only serve the needs of worship, but also serve as a space for education, much like this space right here. And it is integral. It is extremely important to have in a community spaces where you can come, not just to offer salat, but places to come and to congregate with one another, to get to forge those bonds. Now, when it comes to Chicago and the history of where we live, we know that is a history that has been dictated by racist policies. During the Great Migration, as folks were coming up here from the South, they were put into spaces. Basically, you had the South Side and you had the West Side that you were able to move to. And those spaces that we moved to, social services will basically pull from those spaces. Those are spaces where increased police presence. They received increased police presence. These were spaces where Black entrepreneurship was, at certain points, it was present, particularly with the influence of the Nation of Islam. It had a ripple effect, not just for the African American Muslims, but for the African American community, period, where entrepreneurship was something that was sought after and was encouraged. So that also has a great impact on community. So right now, we find ourselves in a position that entrepreneurship is not something that I think it's trying to be revitalized, but it has not had the same type of presence and impact to sustain communities in a way where they're visually or visibly present. To kind of, once again, kind of go off of what you just mentioned, is that most of our communities, a lot of times they are based on the people and not the place. So when you have the expectation that there must be an established place, and if that place doesn't exist, you assume that there is no community. But the definition or the manifestation of community, it has changed, and it is, unfortunately, it has been altered so that it's not dependent always upon a place. I think we're pushing in a different direction now. I can say this for National Tarkwa, as we are, right now we're looking to purchase a place, and there are a few African American majority masajid that have their own. You can pretty much count them, I think, on one hand. One finger? Two fingers? I don't know. So, anyway.
We appreciate those thoughts, brother. Thank you.
I think she got more time than I did.
Don't worry about it.
Good thing we sisters can take a little bit of time for the brother instead. So
it is intersectionally sexed, so we understand that genders.
In agreement with both points, in reflection of both time and space, I want to expound on them just a little bit and really focus on two things. One, these are systems that we're talking about, right? And to really focus us on systems. Sometimes we think of people as individuals that need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right? And when we talk about how does the community treat you, right? How are you treated by other Muslims? I want to broaden that and say, how are we treated in the context of the systems that we all are interplaying with, right? And so when we look at systems, we look at a disproportionate number of the systems targeting African American communities, right? And I'll give a few examples. One, the American Civil Liberties Union of Illinois, from May to August of 2014, CPD reports that CPD stopped 9% of the stops that they made were by for white people. And 72% of them, of the stops that Chicago Police Department made, 72% were blacks. So who are you jailing more, and why is that? Because black people just commit more crimes? No, because you put more police officers in our communities because we're stopped at alarmingly higher rates than anyone else. If you put 1 million fish in one sea and then you put 2 fish in another and you go fishing, you say, wow, I'm catching a lot of fish. Yeah, you're catching a lot of fish because there's a whole lot more police officers looking for those fish, right? And two, when black folks, again, another statistic, for the number of incidents that black folks reported being harassed and abused by police officers, 61% of all of those found by black people, only 25 of them were investigated and sustained. Look at the white population, 21% of their interactions they found were discriminatory or biased in some way, and 58% of those were sustained. So even when we push against these systems, right, and I can go into housing if we want to talk about housing and how, the discriminatory, predatory practices on housing. I can talk about the food deserts that impact the health disparities, where alarming rates of African Americans are dying from cancer, or have higher rates of diabetes, higher levels of strokes, and so all of these are impacted by systems. They don't have health care facilities in those areas. They don't have food in those areas, and you're like, man, you just gotta eat the right food. That's why y'all got more diabetes. Yeah, it's more than that, right? We need to break down these systems, and we need to push against these systems, because if we don't understand this as systemic, then we begin to blame the individual. And when we blame the individual, that's where the anti-blackness comes in. Oh, they just lazy. That's why they don't have jobs. If I go into me as a woman in my gendered self, and I look at the men that are getting paid, and I speak on behalf of Aisha and not of UIC, let me be clear, right? But they getting paid more than me, and I hump every day. right? And that's across the nation. I am not an anomaly. Women are paid less than men across the nation. So when we look at things, we have to go to a systemic level and say there's something wrong with the systems, and stop blaming each other as individuals. So when you ask me how does the Muslim community engage me, I got multiple answers, but it really does depend on who I'm interfacing with and what their life experiences have shown them about who I am. Because if they view me as lazy because I'm black, or if they essentialize me because I have a PhD, so I'm smarter and you're going to be my friend and I'm not messing with those ghetto folk, then that's when we have a problem.
You kind of took that thunder because I was going to lead you to that point. Anyway, because the other aspect of it is when we start talking about treatment of Muslims by each other, it is a perception of who the person is. And what I'm going to lead now, this question, I'm still going to lead with my anecdotal story, but I want to use this as a framework for each of you to kind of share some experiences where you feel, personal experiences where you feel how you were approached as a Muslim, being African American, was different than what you should be. And you can give us the space where you want that. But Dr. Alameen spoke of systematic racism. If anybody in the room does not believe systematic racism believes it does not exist, you should leave the room. Because there's nothing that can be said to get you to understand what we're talking about. Now, with that said, let me show you how it impacts not only the perpetrator, but the victim. And I'm going to put myself in the role of the victim right now. The story I shared earlier with the members of the panel is one time I was downtown coming outside of the office and I saw this young man running. And this young man who was running was white. And the first idea that popped in my mind was, this young man must be late. If that young man had been black, oh, and don't let him have a hoodie on, that man must have stole something. The police has got to be after him. Once again, systemic racism does have an impact and influence on how we think, how we treat each other, how we perceive each other. And if we don't think that exists, then you're rationalizing your own behavior, your own prejudices within a false narrative. So that's my little story that I wanted to share, and I'm going to ask the members of the panel if they could share a story for the purpose of illustrating and illuminating how systemic racism, even in the deen, affects us as Muslims. Anybody want to go first?
I'll start. Again, I'm somebody who came to Chicago as a student, and so for me, navigating the various Muslim communities in Chicago has just been quite the experience. I'm black, I'm Muslim, I'm a woman, and I know that from my experiences being in different communities, if I'm just going to pray, Jumu'ah, it's varied. I found a home actually at Masjid Taqwa, but since I live so far north, I'm not really able to get there as much. But it's the type of community space that really reminds me of my home community, and that where I feel welcome. But also as a Muslim woman, I feel that my voice and the things that I have to contribute are essentially of value, and it's not something that is put sort of on the back. In the backgrounds, right? And I think because of my parents' generation and just the larger context of black people and black women being really essential to civil rights movements, to human rights movements, to liberation movements, those are people who, when they came into Islam, I don't think that my mother and her friends were trying to trade one form of oppression for another. And so being a black woman and being someone who was active in movements in the 60s and in the 70s, they weren't converting to Islam or entering Islam to just not have a role, not have a function. And so I think from those examples, that's how I came to understand my role as a Muslim woman, to be active, to have a voice, to be on the board, to organize things, but also to be on panels, you know. And I understand it in that way. And I think just something, I guess, more broader is the experience of African Americans in the United States with segregation. That was, you know, a system that was imposed for almost 100 years after slavery. So it's like you went from being someone's property and having no human rights to you really still don't have any rights, because we're just, by law, we're just writing it in that you're not going to be as equal, right? You're not going to have access to resources. You're not going to, like all these things that Jim Crow, my parents are not that old, but both of them were born in Jim Crow America. So these are things that are very real to me. But I think because of one form of segregation, racial segregation, I like to say that when it comes to African American Muslims, we don't do so well on the gender segregation tip, because of what our experience has been in the US. We know what that is like. We know that for our experience, segregation is not, like, it's not equal, right? Like that the spaces meant that you were not part of the whole, you were not part of the society, your voices were not really heard. So I think for me, my understanding and my practice and my experience with Islam in America, in my community, it meant that women were completely engaged with any decision and all decisions that were made pertaining to the masjid, pertaining to community, pertaining to families. So that's been my experience, and so that's kind of how I've been navigating. And when I go to different spaces, like I've been in Chicago, those are things that I have to sort of negotiate. Do I want to pray and just pray because I'm in masjid, or do I want to be behind a partition? Am I gonna be subject to, like, you know, people not speaking to me, or kind of shooing me away, or, you know, so those are things that, for me, in my own experience in practice of Islam and the examples that I had, those are things that I negotiate if I'm entering a space. Like, am I gonna feel comfortable? Am I just gonna go through the motions, you know, or am I gonna say, hey, like, this is not something that I want to be a part of?
All right, so I'll answer with this. I don't remember where I was at, but I remember I was not at a masjid that I frequent, but I've gone in to pray, and I had a brother walk up to me, and I just remember how I felt. Okay, so how I felt was, right, forget this kufi, forget all the rest of this. I'm gonna have to have a real conversation with this fella, because, all right, I gotta give context. Okay, so I think I was praying, and then after the prayer, he came over to me and said, brother, you know, you should, he started trying to give me life advice on prayer, on how I should approach it, and did you say this dua first, or your pants should be rolled up, or, you know, and like, right, so I'm from Inglewood, so I'm thinking, you know, I'm like ready to give this guy the mush face, right? But I realized that where he was, in his mind, he feels like he's doing me a service, right? So it didn't come from a negative space, but it came from a place where he saw me in a negative light. He saw me as not knowing that, you know, like it was my first day on the job as a Muslim. And in that type of, when people see you in that light, really all it does is just makes you not want to be around, right? And instead of, and this is something that we all, I think we probably all maybe have done this before, where we take one person's treatment of us and we cast that off on everybody. We say, well, this one guy, he's the representative, and that's one of the responsibilities that I have, you know, as Imam of a masjid, is to make sure that, hey, don't let this sister go be the first person to talk to somebody, because we already know she's not the one, right? She'll have people thinking that we are an abrasive and just unfriendly people. So every masjid, I think somebody mentioned before, every masjid should have a hospitality committee, right? You should have people that are greeting and welcoming and smiling. I used to joke that I used to think Muslim men had no teeth because you never saw them smiling. And I've seen a shift. I've seen a shift over probably the past 10 years, I think, where people are much more mindful of that. As African American, I think it is embedded in me, embedded in most of us, where we are looking to be seen. We want recognition, right? So when we're in spaces, especially when you're traveling, and you happen to be the only black person in the room, and another walks in, man, it is so good to see you, right? Yeah, I know we don't know each other, but give me a hug, come on in. So there's this idea of being seen and being valued that has not always been, not always been, I guess represented in my interactions, particularly early on, with my quote-unquote immigrant brothers and sisters. And I'm not a fan of the term immigrant only because I know that, some of y'all have been here 4 or 5 generations, so are just as native to this space as I am, and don't see yourself within that framework. So to close this out, I'll say that it's extremely important that we not allow the negative interactions that we have on these one-on-one basis, that we allow ourselves to color all of our interactions that we have not even had to think that they're going to go along the same route. And it's also important to make sure that, if you do have this type of bias, to think that you see somebody that's an African American Muslim, that's Black Muslim, to think that they don't know, right? Because some of the most knowledgeable and educated folks that I know as Muslims, scholars of the religion, are African American, but don't get the same type of credence and respect off the bat that they would get if they were not. So
I'm gonna tell a few very quick vignette stories, but I'm going to also, it was very, with intentionality, use Black vernacular in my storytelling. Because while I can talk the King's English at the highest levels, I also can code switch very, very quickly. And so part of when I use those, I will give a translation. So hopefully you're all with me. So when I came back from my stint over in the Netherlands, I came home and I'm like, yo, I gotta find a masjid, right? I have to find a space that, I can get some community going. So I lived in Des Plaines and I was teaching the Glenview School District. And so I looked up the closest masjid. I couldn't tell you now what it was, but I went in and I had a group of sisters that greeted me. Assalamu alaikum, assalamu alaikum. I was like, walaikum salam. I'm like, all cheery and, feeling like, hey, I'm part of the community, right? And then they said, do you know Posh Remover? And I was like, no, I'm okay, I'm good, right? And then they said, oh, extra scarf? And I'm like, I'm straight. So I was thinking they were being generous, and then I caught that this wasn't an option. Like, the option block is off, right? Like you don't get a choice here. Translation. So they began to cover my neck because I had my scarf like this. They began to try to take the fingernail polish off because certainly I could not be in real wudu with that on. And what I did is I said, okay, I'm not feeling y'all. Translation, I don't like this. So I turned around. I aborted my obligation to make Jummah prayer. And instead I sat in the car and cried. I cried because I came from a country that I went to Jummah and I didn't understand the language. And with jubilation, I went to another masjid and I couldn't get past the front door in order to make my salah. I kept making my way. I said, well, I know there's another one. A lie has not forsaken me. I know there's a masjid out there that I can find that will welcome me. So in between going to masjids, I go to the grocery store. And I'm like, hey, I hear them talking Arabic. He says, Allahu Akbar, Alhamdulillah, something. I'm like, oh, it's not something like him as I'm buying my hot Cheetos, right? And he gives the greeting and says, oh, where are you from? And I said, Chicago, South Side, right? And then he says, where is your husband from? I said, I'm not married. Huh. He looks puzzled. in his mind, what I realize now that I didn't realize then, is that there's no way that you can be a Muslim from the south side of Chicago. He didn't even make the connection with his own history of city situated with selling alcohol and cigarettes on the block. He didn't situate himself within a larger context of the black experience that made him able to sit in that space and say Allahu Akbar and nobody look at him. And this was before 9/11. One more situation, and this is after I got married and I had babies. And yo, you all moms in here, you know, after you have little ones, you're like in a whole other world, and you're like, I just want to like feel normal again. So I had twins as my first shorties, in other words, babies, shorties, and yeah, they were just little ones, and I said, I gotta get out. I want to go to the masjid. I want to pray with my sisters. I want to feel some bonds. I couldn't go as far as my regular masjid, but I said, you know what? Because we were late, because one had done something in their pamper, and I had to, you know how that goes. And so I was there. I'm sweating. I'm frustrated because one is crying now. I got two carried. I mean, it was a yeah, one of those days. A sister runs out on the front steps. And I'm like, hey, I'm thinking, oh, alhamdulillah, Allah sent you to help me because I'm struggling. She says, are they in diapers? And I said, yes, they're in diapers. Excuse me. Sorry, sister. If they're in diapers, they're not allowed in the masjid. I said, excuse me? Yes, there's no restrooms in the masjid area. We can't have the. And I said, wow. I said, okay. And it took everything in me not to go back to where I was 5 years prior, where I went back to my car and I wept. Instead, I said, if you don't move the hell out of my way, move. And I went in and I made my prayer, right? And so these are the spaces, right? These are the spaces that we have to navigate. And it should not take courage to go to Juma prayer, people. It shouldn't take that, right? And so the engagement that we have with each other as strangers on the steps or in the foyer and wherever that is, we have to understand the space that people are in. We have to understand the cultural overlay that we put on Islam, and we have to have some love and compassion for one another. Guess what? I ain't messing with you if you don't love me, right? I don't care if you're Muslim, Christian, Jew, I don't care. If you're not showing me no love, I have no love for you. I can love you and pray for you, but I can't interact with you because what I do know too is how to cuss somebody out real quick. And what I try not to do is go there, right? I really do, because I know, that's not in the best light, and I try to stay in the best light, right? And so those are my experiences, and since I've had some pretty great experiences too, but I wanted to highlight those because I know as I got laughters and head nods that they resonate with folks, because this is, and when we talk systemic, this is a systemic problem in our Muslim community, people. I didn't stop in displays. I went to 8 masjids before I found a masjid that I could pray in. That's a problem. And guess what? It's ours to solve. It's ours.
Can I say one quick thing?
Yeah, since you got cut
30
off.
seconds, thank you. All right, so first of all, I thank MEC for hosting this, for allowing this conversation to take place. And I'm probably sure that the people who really need to hear this are probably not in the room. But, so, that being said, everybody has a responsibility to take that back to those people that you know need it. And we'll find ourselves in spaces with people that will say something that'll let you know that, oh, you should have been there. Give me 5 minutes of your time. So take what we talk about here, and make sure it manifests in those spaces where it's gonna help somebody move forward in their understanding.
Inshallah.
Let me, I'm being nudged here to make sure I understand where we're supposed to be at. I know the next form, next aspect of the theme of the next questions were from them was, how do we move forward? What are the things that we should be doing to improve this intersectionality between races, genders, and social class. But why don't you just step up? I can't read your mind.
I just wanted you to read the agenda.
Oh, well, that's what you need to do. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. We're actually at a little bit behind schedule, about 15 minutes behind schedule. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Noshina. I'm a member of the Interfaith Committee. We were going to do an activity, but I've heard a few people would like to ask some questions. The questions were usually at the end. So what I'm going to do is, I'm actually going to give the mic back to our moderator, but I would like to have you start to ask your questions right now. And then if the questions start to die out, we'll go ahead and do the activity. Is that all right?
Yeah. Excuse me, 1 minute before you go away.
And if you're thinking, we can probably think of something to you.
The last question, that's an important question.
That's an important question. All right. As our host or hostess just indicated, there may be a number of questions that are in the air. So if we can, do you need a mic?
Yeah, let me give him this mic. You guys take this.
I don't think I need it. Here, we're gonna circulate.
Oh, because it's being recorded. That will happen.
Assalamu alaikum. You know, I came to attend, this is my first meeting where I'm trying to get a little flavor of the black culture and get your perspective. I'm fairly active in downtown Islamic Center, and I wanted to let you know why I came here. So I haven't heard much of that, a little bit from Sister Amin maybe. What intersectionality meant to me was among us, the white Muslims, the black Muslims, the Indian and Pakistani and other Muslims that are attending their mosque in the neighborhood. How, like me, I like to know, how do I make you feel welcome in downtown Islamic Center? Since I haven't had a lot of interface with Afro-American black people growing up, and I see a lot of them coming, and I thought that this venue would allow me to understand how to make, like the sister said from Atlanta, yourself feel welcome and brotherhood and sisterhood back in DIC so we can improve that relationship. And that's what I came here to listen to, but I haven't heard much of
that. First off, because I work, I'm downtown, I'm over at DIC quite often for the prayer. And I think just my personal feeling, I think you do a great job of keeping up a very open and a really and an upbeat type of atmosphere. So after the prayer, normally would get up and offer a hadith. And I remember the one that you talked about, smiling. And I thought that was extremely important. But as far as the intersectionality is concerned, as far as our diversity is concerned, the bonding, community bonding that I have seen in my experience does not come just in the prayer. The prayer is good, but the social aspect, having spaces where people can come together and actually get to know one another. These things are hindered. I don't want to focus too much on the hindrances, but I can't really, maybe we can get to a solution by understanding the hindrances. Some of these hindrances are, they are gender relations. I do for Bridging the Gap, I've been doing a brother's breakfast for the past almost 8, 9 years. And my wife, she does one for the sisters.
I haven't been invited.
You're invited. Get your information. Have you liked the Facebook page? So, and I think this is particularly important. This goes into the question that was also asked. When we're talking about a diverse community, and in light of Islamophobia, it is extremely important to me for my Muslim sisters to see me as their brother, right? And to see me as a protection in the absence of my brothers, right? We haven't got to that point because it is a really Victorian influence, I believe, not necessarily a Muslim influence, but a Victorian influence where everything is hypersexualized. Where if we're to give the salams to a sister, you know, she think you're trying to hit on her, right? I just wished you the peace that only God can give you. That's all I did, right? So if we can't be brothers and sisters, if we can't realize that these gender separations, in a lot of cases, they stop us from being a cohesive community, then that intersectionality is going to end at simply having more brothers come to prayer, or maybe more sisters come to an event. We have to have spaces where we can actually come together as community. And I know that is impacted by cultural understandings where, you know, like we went somewhere to an event and the brother tried to tell me, oh, the sisters are sitting over here and the brothers over here. No, we rolling together. We sitting in the same space. You're not going to separate this. So we need to that's something that we need to have some community dialogue about. But I think that you're doing an excellent job in terms of just the attitude at DIC. I've always felt welcome here.
And if I can add to that, I don't frequent DIC, and so I can't talk with the particulars, but I am an educator of educators, so I teach teachers. And so many times teachers say, just tell me how to keep my classroom, you know, the discipline right? Or just tell me how to teach math. And so they're looking for a magic bullet. And I know that I would love to give them all a magic bullet, as I would love to give that to you. But I say there is no magic bullet. There are things that we can do on a constant basis, but I think there's some internal work that has to start at the individual level so that then we change the systems, right? And so that is how do we think of black folk, right? How do we value them? How do we show our value to them? I think those are the questions that we have to ask, because those are exuded in our interactions with them. And so my interaction in these spaces was like, they don't value me or see me in my culture, because they wouldn't be trying to cover my neck up as soon as I come in, or know that I'm a mama first, right? And so these interactions, but we don't understand those things sometimes because we don't have us represented on boards making decisions. We don't have us part of those conversations where decisions are happening, where programs are being planned. I just talked to a group of people who said, hey, I know you got a connection with the African American Muslim community, can you get them to this event? I'm like, hell to the no. What I can do is I can tell you that they should have been part of planning the event so that event is relevant to them. Right? You can't tell me to have them come to an event and they're like, that's whack, we're not going to that, right? Because it doesn't resonate with me. It's not relevant to me. It means nothing to me. And so we have to be part of the conversations and decision makings and the policies that are integrated into the systems in order for us to feel welcomed into those systems, right? And so that's what I would say. And that's no easy task. And I'm not saying it to DIC, because DIC may be there already. I have no idea. I'm saying it in a general senses that we have to have representation on those decision-making and policy-making spaces in order to feel that we are welcome there, in order to feel that we are part of those spaces. And we can't have, as the Imam said, we can't have... The Muslim police is what we call them on the logo, right? We can't have the Muslim police everywhere you go. Oh, sister, did you make wudu with your right hand? I didn't see that part, right? So we have to check each other too, like, because you can have the greatest things going up at the top level, but at the groundswell, you got the Muslim police pushing everybody out because, wow, I see the piece of your right ear, right? And I'm being very facetious, and it's all in humor. And I respect, there's much respect there, but I think humor sometimes is a gateway into us understanding each other and relating to each other. And so that's just my 2 cents.
There's an overarching sort of, I think, importance of just basic adab, right? Like, even if you, is this on?
Yes, we can hear you.
There should be some compassion, right? Like, there should be an awareness of, you know, Allah has made us from different nations and tribes so that we may know one another, right? And not sort of trying to impose your understanding of Islam, what you think is the mainstream onto someone else who comes from a different cultural lens, different educational background, whatever, right? Like, we're all human and we're all one in that space, and that is how Allah, created us, and that is manifest in many of our rights when we are praying together, when we are on Hajj together. And so I think most of these things, when you talk about like how do we kind of just like implement it, I think it starts with just going back to Islam and understanding that, this basic adab, right? Like basic care and concern and compassion for your fellow human being and just seeing them as human beings. Question?
We were able to come to this event today. First of all, I just want to ask the sister who spoke earlier about your experiences in the masjid. I was one of those people nodding my head and saying yes, because I've had every one of those experiences that you talked about, whether it's related to my baby or what kind of hijab or skirt I wasn't wearing or was wearing. So yeah, it's very frustrating to feel like you're not welcomed in a house of prayer. And I think with the brother who had said, talk to the people who aren't here, my struggle is there are times when you're trying to create change or make the massages a more welcoming place, and you do have those discussions with people, the kind of feedback I've received is, well, that's just the way it is in Chicago, or that's just the way it is, or that's not going to change, or, you have to have a certain other, well, I think I went to another event where I heard you all speak, and the response I received was, when you want to create change, you have to talk to people privately, and try to, address it privately, and then that's the way the Prophet, peace be upon him, did it. And I'm like, well, what if you've done that and things still haven't changed? So I feel like a lot of times when you try to address things, there are people who want to maintain the status quo. And that's my frustration is, I, like you, want to be, this is what drew me to Islam. I'm a convert to Islam. One of the things that drew me to Islam was the universal brotherhood and sisterhood that I saw in it, that I saw in the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, but I don't see practice today.
So I have like wild ideas about community and how things could change or could manifest. And I created a resource list that I'm gonna email out to our organizers so that if you're on the listserv of MCC, then they're gonna be happy to go ahead and share that. But I was having a conversation with a friend who is the first generation Nigerian American, so her parents immigrated, so she kind of has like the immigrant narrative, but she's also Black, and her husband is like fresh off the Benin boat. So, but her husband was trying to sort of integrate into some of the Chicago already established organizations of Muslims, and he was sharing like a lot of his frustrations. And somehow in the conversation, I was like, those aren't, the status quo does not like apply to him. It's not relevant to his experience. And so I think for me, when I think about those things, is you have to sort of establish, and maybe this, it's incredible work. I know our parents and other generations have done this before, but you have to sort of establish a community of like-minded people where you have those similar values. Because the people who already exist in these spaces, they don't speak to you. They don't speak to what, in 2018 or whatever your experience is, they're not speaking to those values that you may have. And I don't think it's wrong to want to establish or create something, from the ground up, I know that my parents' generation did it. They are people who all converted. So I think it's really also interesting when you think about it. I didn't really think about it until like being outside of like the nest and like being in different situations where I'm thinking like, they were an entire community, like they don't identify, that's another thing, they don't identify as being converts, right? Like they're just Muslim, but also everybody in their community was a convert. So none of them were like, there wasn't this hierarchy of I'm more Muslim than you sort of thing. It's like there's an entire community of people who converted to Islam, established their own community, and then they birthed their kids, and their kids are raised Muslim, and like I'm a product of that. And so like, that may be a solution. That may be something that, again, it's a wild idea, but it's something that I think with the change of time, like, is probably very necessary, especially for a place like Chicago. But I'm going to pass the mic, but I do have, I don't know if maybe I can just kind of, I think at this point I'll probably just like flip on the projector and like leave it up so people can kind of gather the resources if they want, but I will want to sort of share that out with everyone.
Any other questions that would like to be asked of the panelists?
I want to follow up why don't you work with me at DIC on that, and let's try to make it more exclusive and move from where you think it's good enough to much better.
You mean
And also-
inclusive, right?
Inclusive. Don't be so hard.
Why, he's my brother, he's got.
I know, that's why
Sister not gonna let it
Did I say something wrong? Don't inclusive. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
And then sister, I want to let you know that MCC, where you are today, and Downtown Islamic Center have black brothers in our board. So we do our best to make sure, I mean, at this time they don't, but they have had it. Our DIC board has it today. So I just wanted to let you know that we are doing what you are expecting us to do. But at the same time, I have to tell you that they have to carry their weight too when they are in the board. And that's where I think that sometimes we are not seeing that from the other board members that are African American. So alhamdulillah, I just wanted to let you know that.
Alhamdulillah. So in all love, and please do accept all of my dialogue in that context. My hope is that it is not, how do I say this? I'm just going to say it. I would hope that it's not just that those black folks not carrying their weight, right? That we are critical and critiquing of all of the people on the board, because I'm on several boards. CARE Chicago is one of them. That many people don't carry their weight, and this black girl does, right? And so, but the conversation is never, oh, the Pakistanis need to carry their weight. They never do, right? And so I think we get into this, and it may be that one brother, you may have one brother on there who's not carrying his weight, but it's then seen as the black people don't carry their weight, right? And so we have to unpack what that means. And I'm not, and in no way am I, because I don't know, right? But I'm just taking what you said and I'm overlaying it on my own experiences. That I know when I go into a room and I'm the only African American in the room, that I am looked at and I am judged and I'm critiqued at highest level. So I gotta come with the thunder every time. That expectation should be for everyone in that room. But it is not. It is not, and that has not been my experience. When I was in the military and I was a soldier, I made sergeant after 2 years because I knew I had to bring the thunder. Everywhere I go, the expectation is up here for me. For me to excel, I have to go to the highest levels. That's because I am essentialized and I know that I represent all black folk, right? I know that that weight is on my back. And so I go in there knowing that I gotta represent y'all well. That's not a good look, right? But I know I weigh. So I challenge us to look at each individual as the individual they are and not representative of an entire community, right? Because I think when we do that, we do ourselves a disservice and we go into an anti-blackness space that black folks are lazy again. If we're gonna have them, we gotta have them pull their weight, right? And so it shouldn't be that. We've had people in the past, and I would venture to say there's been some Paco Indians that have not pulled their weight. There've been some Asians that on your board that haven't pulled their weight. There've been some women that have not pulled their weight. There've been some young folks that have not pulled their weight. So let's not talk about just one group of people in an essentialized way and not have that rhetoric with all of them.
I want to add one other thing.
Wait, I'm sorry. And I'm passionate just because that's who I be, yes, right? Yes. But it's not in a row, you know, like I'm not in an attacking or and I have to, you know, I have to give that caveat because then I get that label, right? And so it's out of love.
Yes.
No, but that actually is true because I'm always mindful of the stereotype of the angry black man, which puts a damper quite often on the idea of being evenly keeled. But I do want to address something, and I know that there was no ill intent in it, but it's just something I feel is important for me to voice right now in this gathering. And that is this brilliant woman right here who earned her PhD in Urban Education and Policy Studies from USC. It's Dr. Aisha Amin. And quite often I've been in spaces not where it's just where it has been her in particular, where I've been in other boards, where Dr. Suad, Abdul Kabir of Sapelo Square, where I was in meetings with Dr. Bambadi Shakur Abdullah, may Allah grant her paradise, where she was referred to as Sister Bambadi, Sister Suad, Sister Aisha, right? There is this negation, and I don't think it's that it is intentional, but I've also sat in the same meetings with my good brother right here, Dr. Kaisuddin, right? Where he was referred to as doctor, where it's been Dr. whoever else, and they are given that recognition, Dr. So-and-so, Dr. So-and-so, but when it's the sister, it's not doctor, it's sister. And I think just in these small awarenesses, these are huge things. These are huge things, because we're giving a person their due. We're giving them the value. And I'll put them on blast, one of my mentors, my beloved Imam Frederick. I remember you were on the panel for the care banquet. And she was referred to a couple of times as sister. And I didn't notice until later. He walked up there with a piece of paper, and what you put on that? You put doctor, right? And they corrected themselves. I mean, real low-key, right? But I think this is something that is also important, is that we understand the value of the people that we have around us. And when it comes to our gender relations, things that push folks out the room, feel like that they don't need to be in a conversation, this is one of those things. So, inshallah, we can be mindful of those things. And I say that knowing that there was no ill intent, just bringing it up, because I feel like it was a good point.
Yeah, let me just ask a question. Can I follow up?
Kim?
Can I ask you? Something about the doctor and the sister?
Yes.
Yes.
You know, do you feel a pressure? You know, I'm married to a white man who has a PhD from Purdue University, and he never, no, the thing is, he never cares. He's Dan. In fact, most people don't know that he's a doctor. He's never referred to as doctor. We never introduce him as doctor. We get invitations sometimes with Mr. and Mrs. Rahman, which is my last name, not even his last name, and none of it bothers him. Is it that because he has that privilege, that he just doesn't have to fight for it, and you feel that you have to fight for it because your title is the only way for you to get respect?
I think to that point, so the founder of Sapelo Square is Dr. Suad Abdul-Kabir, right? She's spoken here before. She speaks all over the country, and she's been all over the world. And we were just having a conversation. I was on a panel at University of Chicago 2 days ago, and we were having this conversation. It was a panel full of Black Muslim women. Some of them were refugees, some of them were immigrants. There was myself. There was a sister who was born and raised in the Nation of Islam. So we had various experiences, but there were 2 doctors on the panel, and part of that, and we talked about intersectionality, you mentioned before what you thought it meant, and what it really means is various identities within a person or a group. So whereas, like to what you said, your husband is a white male in America, and I've worked with colleagues who are male, who have the title of, doctor, they have PhDs, they don't care and they don't have to. So whereas a woman, right, especially if you're a woman of color, right, you already sort of exist in this identity that, 1, you're a person of color, so your value is diminished. 2, you're a woman, so based on your gender, again, your value is diminished. And so yes, there is always that sort of fight to recognition, because this person worked just as hard to earn these letters, and yet everyone else who interacts with them or engages with them is not giving them their due. So it's easy, again, like we were talking about this, my male colleagues, they go by their first names, they don't really care. But again, it goes back to what you said, that's the privilege that they possess by just being male, right? And if you're a white male, then it's like, okay, you don't have to care about those things. Whereas the good doctor here, that's the reality. That's, and she can speak better to that.
So I definitely agree. I am very funny. So some fights I fight on my own, and some I allow my good brothers to fight for me, right? That's one that I allow them to fight for me, for the most part. I know this brother here, this brother here, but what I think is part of what I see in this is that in the African American community, having a PhD and being called doctor is a big deal. When we possess only 4% of the PhDs in the nation, it's a big deal. And what I was told by one of my mentors, which I hold true today, is that PhD is not just for you, it's for a community of folks, right? And so when you don't address it as such, you're not just diminishing me, you're diminishing a community that I've worked for and represent in many spaces with this, right? And so there is a white privilege space where I'm gonna have access because of my whiteness or because of my maleness. In the same spaces that I won't have that access if I don't have certain degrees or certain experiences and certain, so there is a difference in how we address people, and there's also a respect that comes with that. And again, I generally just kind of, unless it's my undergrad students, and then I feel some type of way, but generally I don't, but as soon as I don't, I have someone else, wait, that's doctor, and I appreciate that. In certain ways, it helps. It helps as a reminder that this is a community degree, and I have. When I am in those spaces, and I am the only woman, I am the only black person, I am the only Muslim, and be clear, I'm like third in UIC as far as administration. It's administration for the university. And be clear that most spaces I am in, the intersecting identities that I bring in a space is the only one. Being Muslim, being woman, and being black, I may be the only one of all of those things, right? And so it is, it's essential that when they put on the agenda who is on the agenda, they are putting Associate Pro Chief of Staff Dr. Aisha El-Amin, because some of them, as soon as they see me, have already discounted the knowledge base that I bring to the conversation.
Yeah, last thing, and I'm just to give the other side of that, which is either we on a first name basis, everybody, we're not using titles,
Yeah.
right? Or we're gonna use titles. But it goes at me a little bit when we're in situations where this person gets his title, and to the and we neglect using it for the other person. Because I'm not really big into titles.
Yeah. And that was not a disclaimer for all of you to call me Dr. Aisha El-Amin.
Yeah,
no way.
No way.
I think you made that clear. Or another question.
A couple of brief comments first before the question. Yes, a lot of people call me Dr. Bashiruddin, but I also want you to know a lot of people, possibly in your age, or certainly people with their children in college level, call me Uncle Bashiruddin. Okay, now the other comment I want to make is, I read a Facebook post today from the youth director of MCC. And he said a young man came to pray in the masjid, and his cell phone went off, started ringing. And then after the prayer was over, the imam and some other people scolded him, why are you doing that? And so he stopped coming to the masjid. And then of course I think it goes a little bit in exaggeration, but that's enough to make the point that every masjid really needs a welcoming committee. Yeah. It is, I think many of the Muslims take the Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar, that enjoin the good and forbid the bad, to heart. They don't realize how to do it, but they know that they have to do it, so they comment on people, this and that. I went to India a few years ago, and I was praying in the masjid, and I had gotten used to praying without a hat on my head. So while I was in the prayer, somebody picked up a hat from someplace and came and put it on my head. so things like this happen. But it doesn't mean that those should be accepted and should be, no, we need, definitely, badly need welcoming committees in every masjid. There are a lot of people who are getting turned away from the masajid because of the bad behavior of some Muslims. So I do have a question. There has been so much oppression of the African Americans being killed by police and being shot out at the church and so on and so forth. So the Black Lives Matter movement started a little bit, but I've not seen that thing much going on. Especially, I thought, I do not know, we have definitely gotten the statistics that the crimes against Muslims went up after the Trump administration came into power. And we know that how the Hispanics, Mexicans are affected because of the deportations and so on. Have the negative treatment of African Americans gone up since the Trump administration came to power? They don't have to go up, they were bad even before. So why hasn't the Black Lives Matter or any other similar movement is very active? Is that, or maybe it is, I do not know. Just tell me if it's active or if it's not active, why it's not active.
I'll give a quick answer and I'll pass it on and hear the other ideas. As for, well, what gets publicity is not necessarily a reflection of what actually is happening. But within this whole realm of activism, which has become its own industry, generating news and giving people notoriety, we kind of judge. We let that be the metric. How many times we see somebody on television, or how many times we hear about a story as an indicator of its actual presence or its efficacy. But I would also add on to that, awareness and policy are not the same thing, or effect on policy. So the Black Lives Matter movement as an instrument of bringing greater awareness to the conditions that are going on has had a great amount of effect and has received a fair amount of backlash as well. But in terms of its impact on policies that are going to address some of these systemic and institutional wrongs, well, that remains to be seen. And I couldn't really intelligently speak to that.
I was also going to say that Black Lives Matter as an organization and movement is very decentralized. Like, there's not a one. It's very relative to where people live. So if you live in and around St. Louis or Ferguson, there's a chapter for that space. If you live in Baltimore, there's a chapter for that space. So I think in terms of statistics, it'll be an interesting study of what different chapters are able to accomplish on a very local level versus thinking of it in terms of like on a federal or a national level. I do know that the original founders of Black Lives Matter, they're three African descendant women. They've been recognized internationally for various awards, one particular in Australia. So there is positive impact and recognition and awareness and acknowledgement, not just within the U.S., but also internationally. So I would definitely encourage everyone in terms of like when we leave today to access the resources. I'm going to go ahead and try to see if I can put it on the projector, but access the resources that we have so that we can learn more about, at least develop a baseline knowledge about what organizations are out there, who's behind them, how they're being funded or supported, and what their impact is.
Assalamu alaikum. All right, I know, and trying to keep to the schedule, and we're a little bit off track, and I know the intent is to end at 4, and there's one activity that the host has indicated wanted to try to achieve before the end of the program. So at this point in time, we would turn the mic over to Nasheed Rahman.
All right, assalamu alaikum. This is the teacher in me. It's very difficult for me to let you just listen to these wonderful people without you doing something. What I'd like you to do is take a look on your tables. If you see this sheet right over here, and there should be some writing utensils on the table also. Okay, the other thing that I would like you to do is get up and move to a table, fill up a table, and make sure that you're sitting with some people that you don't know. So once you get to that table, fill this out, and then after you fill it out, I will tell you what we're going to do. And I'm going to walk around and make sure that you're working.
And you're only giving them 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna give them a lot of time. Can I ask you also to participate? If you don't mind?
Absolutely.
Below that, if the majority of my coworkers were female, I would circle that. And then I would go to my supervisor is, I would not circle it if it was male. So go ahead and circle every column that matches that first thing that you wrote. And I'll come around and take a look and see if you're doing it. $23, so congratulations. Okay. 22, 21, 20. I want to look at my husband's here. I mean, come on here. All right, 20. Okay, who's got 20? All right. Oh, all right. Okay, 19. Okay, he's only 20 because he's married to me. Okay, people okay, 19, 18. Okay, wow. 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. Anyone below this? Wow. Can you tell me your number, brother?
9.
9. Wow. You are always explaining yourself. You are always having to teach, because that's what it is. We're always teaching. The lower that number is. And I know, because you're always teaching me. Thank you. All right, so I want you to take a look at that and reflect on how easy or difficult. Oh, I'm sorry. What was yours?
I'm 11.
11. Okay. So again, yeah?
It's interesting. You're framing that as maybe a difficult thing of having to explain yourself. Doesn't it kind of mean you're more open-minded?
No, because I think this is a privilege activity. It's the idea that the higher your number is, the easier your life kind of is. You know, and we know what the people will cheat, because they start to realize that, oh my gosh, everybody I associate with is my gender, my race, my religion. You know, and that goes to show you that they start to understand, even if you're cheating, you're still understanding that, oh, actually my life is a little bit easier. And you might be more open-minded, but it's still more difficult. You can be open-minded, but you're always the teacher in whatever group you're in. You know, I mean, and I think that those of us who have lower numbers, we understand that. You know, we're sitting there, and no, you can't really even have a conversation without being the teacher of the group all the time, right? So.
As I was writing here, it's interesting, NPR did a whole segment on, you know, the black race and how there's more depression and suicide in the black race and how they're not able to express their, you know, frustration in life. And this really leads to it. If you're constantly having to teach and you're the minority and you're always struggling, of course you'd have more depression, and of course, you know, it would lead to different circumstances.
Right, and I think, but then also, I know a lot of African Americans that, because I taught on the South Side, and they actually, their only experience with non-black people was the school. I mean, they, you know, that was it, and, you know, so, but then you understand the comfort of people who have a job, who are able to leave, but they don't. Because I couldn't understand that at first. Like, okay, she's a nurse, and she can, you know, she could leave, but it's very difficult to leave, because, you know, you're always educating other people.
I think, like what you said, the way it manifests, so like, I'm black and a Muslim and a woman.
Yeah, we're an intimate group.
I'm black, Muslim, and a woman, and I live in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood where they're Jewish from like European descent, so they're white. And then, like, before, like, in my previous work, I worked in Bridgeview, so that was predominantly Arab, and I'm just, you know, like, you feel it on a day-to-day basis when you have to go to work every day, and you have to explain, like, it's very exhausting, and you can easily start to develop resentment towards people, because it's not like you get a break from it, it's every day having to explain why, not that you're the problem, but someone else's thinking is a problem. And like having to challenge, like I could be working on a spreadsheet, I could be actually doing my job, I could be progressing in my career, but I'm having to stop and have a conversation at a board meeting or at a staff meeting about why certain language and conversation shouldn't be used in the professional workspace, you know, and it's like, you imagine like your energy being used in a different way, right? And so it does get exhausting, and it is just, you know, it made me like want to leave that space, and I did. But anyway, I left that workspace, and like now I find myself in a different workspace where I'm at Navy Pier, and I'm at the radio station, and it's, I mean, I've always been sort of like outside of my comfort zone, but I have this one, I was gonna say, I have this one white auntie. She was, I mean, she, not to tokenize her, but she was one of the, we had like a peppered in of different people, predominantly African American, but we had like some Desi aunties, we had some white American aunties in my community. So I've been around people who are different than myself. But she told me once, she was like, you know, Bashir, you have a good way, like you're really good at like being comfortable in whatever space you're in. And I was like, really? I do? Then I started to think about it, like, do I? But anyway, I take that with me whenever I'm someplace else where I am the only person that looks like me, because then I think that, well, I can be in this space and like, you know, just be comfortable and be okay, you know, but when the macro and microaggressions come, that's when the challenge comes.
No, I totally agree. When I first joined the military, I was and I said, I see white people. I had lived in a community where there were only people that looked like me, gone to school with only people that looked like me. The only time I saw anyone that didn't look like me were those field trips to downtown Chicago. And now I was asked to live in the space with white people, right? And people that didn't look like me. And what I learned through that experience is how much that diversity enriched me. Gave me deeper understandings of our own humanity and what joins us. And so while it is a challenge to be in those spaces and constantly need to teach, there's a blessing in being in those spaces, because you learn more about yourself, you learn more about others, and you learn more about how to situate yourself within the context of the global context. And so, yeah.
Did you find out they're just like me?
In a lot of ways, but we had this whole thing about hair, right? It was like, you wash your hair every day? Like, and it was like, yeah, because it would get greasy. And man, and I'm like, I could not wash my hair. Like, so it's those kinds of things, right? Like we had real conversations. And so, both in our differences and in the things that joined us and the things that divided us, we had very candid conversations. And I have family members, like, they're my family now. I was overseas and we were family, and we still are family, right? And so, but we were able to have those conversations that, yeah, when you say that, like when you got Biggie on a weed rapper, you better pause when you say that word, right? Like, so what that means is, so I think it's negotiating that, it highlights you as an individual, but it also colors you in the light of the greater humanity as well.
Assalamu alaikum. All good things must come to an end, as will this panel discussing, inshallah, today. They say the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. Inshallah, this has been a first step. And as the panel appealed to you at the beginning, we would hope that the Interfaith and Outreach Committee here at MCC will take this as a first step and then start to work with maybe some of the panelists to cultivate some action steps, some asks, so there is a feeling we won't have the question that was asked. I didn't read it, but it kind of summarized, well, based on where we're at now, is the needle moving in a positive direction? In essence, that's what the question was. And the only way it's not going to move through conversations. It's only going to move through actions. And inshallah, we've been heard enough, been inspired enough to begin to take steps to put these words into actions. And With that, I would ask Imam Tariq Al-Amin, as a member of the panel, to kind of close this session out. Thank you.
Imam, could we say a dua for Syria also, please?
Absolutely, absolutely. Ooh, almost there. That's kind of bad leg. Bismillah. Allah, we ask that you give patience, you give relief to those who are dealing with the atrocities of oppression, the loss of life in Syria, and for those who are dealing with the oppression, the loss of life and freedom everywhere. Allah, we ask that you deliver them from their distress, keep them mindful that you are near, allow us to do whatever we can to be a relief and a benefit toward them. Ameen. We close out this dialogue today being mindful that each of us have a responsibility, each of us have a duty to improve the spaces that we are in. Allah, we ask that you allow us to take what has been given to us today in the best of light, the best manner, and a joyful heart to take this to those who are not here. And inshallah, we allow ourselves to be the agents of change that is needed for our communities. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr. Inna al-insana la fi kusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati. Wa tawassaw bil haqqi wa tawassaw bis sabr.
And thank you everyone.